Well, welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Real Profit, Real Perspective podcast. How do I decide what to do? I'm Connor Malatesta, managing partner at Markoff and Malatesta CPAs, and I am joined by my co-host Ryan Bannister, the amazing owner of One Up Advisors. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm just happy to be talking to you.
Aw, you're so sweet. If only my clients were that sweet.
I know, right?
They're all too busy dodging emails and phone calls and all the things that they want us to do, and then hope that I can just magic information out of their head.
All the
It's
things that
great.
clients love to do.
Truly, we don't spend our time working with numbers. We spend most of our time trying to just manage people to get them to communicate. We'll have to make a note of that to have an entire episode on
It is
proper
a people
communication.
business.
We'll turn our off the camera rants into what is the phrase? Monetizable content by ranting about it, but now it's professional because it's a podcast. It's not just a Discord call late at night. So today's topic is decisions, which I know is something both of us have at least a little bit of familiarity with, because I believe the last time we had talked about it, we make at least 2 decisions a day, 3, I believe, somewhere in the 300. Sorry, the constant. What do I do for this? What do I do for that? We figured it would make, besides the obligatory segue from the previous episode, pretty open-ended discussion on just the nature of making decisions, because Lord knows I've had conversations with clients that we have tried to talk them through. How do I decide what to do? A, B, C, or D? Should we do it? Should we not do it? I'm pretty certain people have written books on the nature of making decisions, and what better way to hop on the bandwagon than to also talk about making decisions.
And put our classic spin on it.
Oh yeah, there's nothing we love more than taking something, tweaking it slightly, and saying that it's ours.
But I
So,
liked that about, sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to say
you're
I
good.
liked that about this episode, that we're leaving out sort of the next part of it of making a decision about something, but rather how we walk through the actual decision-making process, which for me, I think is different. It can be different based on the decision, whether it's almost subconscious or whether you have to write out a whole spreadsheet analysis on what to do, right? So I think there's a lot of room for discussion within this.
And that just prompted my first question. So when you're making a decision between anything, and I know you've made some where you sit there and you do a bunch of heavy analytics into it, or decisions that you just make on the fly, what drives the difference in level of analysis of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think classic me, a lot of times I don't really know. Maybe that applies to everyone, or maybe that's just me. But what I've learned about myself, at least over the course of owning my own business, is I tend to make decisions quickly, and I don't need a lot of detail to get there.
And how does that work
Sometimes
out
that
for you?
pays off, sometimes that does not. I just can't sit there and debate about something forever and ever. I would rather make a wrong decision and change and pivot things down the road when we've had time to learn what's gone well and what hasn't, what we would change. So, that doesn't necessarily apply across the board, right? Like if there's an important, a very high stakes decision, I'll put the level of effort that I deem necessary into it. Like, I think the difference would be whether, at least an easy example, whether you're trying to decide on a new software or decide whether to hire somebody, would be likely two separate levels of decision making. And maybe that's oversimplifying, I don't know, but
I mean, a lot of times simplification can kind of cut to the the core of the matter. There's actually two important things that you have kind of touched upon that I have done a lot of reflection on and have been able to codify a little bit more. The first idea here that I want to hit on is echoing your process there of making a decision, seeing how it plays out, and then pivoting later on. When I first went into business, I did a bunch of reading, some of it useful, most of it not. But I can't remember where I read this. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was on Reddit, to be honest. But it was, don't worry about making the right decision, make the decision right. And I remember reading that, and it stuck with me just in the back of my head for a while. And I needed a lot of time to kind of get to the wisdom behind that phrase. Because the thing that I have found is that despite our best attempts, despite all of the software processes, despite all the information that's available, despite all the planning you can put into it, never mind the fact that plans never survive first contact, you never have perfect information of the situation you are trying to make a decision about. Whether it is picking up that new software system for whatever you're trying to do, or you're hiring somebody, or you're having to fire someone, or you're dealing with a client and they're upset for a multitude of reasons. Really, no matter what you're doing, you never have 100% perfect knowledge of all of the extenuating factors, which means if you wait to collect all the data possible, you're effectively doing a long, drawn out decision not to decide.
Mm-hmm.
And one other, I guess I'm going to be full of sayings on this episode, but I'm pretty certain this one comes from my mother, who once upon a time told me not making a decision is still making a decision. You've just decided to do nothing. And the first, I think this gets into really the first dichotomy, and I want to go deeper into when you're actually making decisions and what our usual approach is, and different risks and stuff like that. But at the beginning, you have the basic idea of, do I change or do I not change? Making a decision for anything is choosing to change something. You've had to decide, you've had some thing pop up in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first decision to be made is, do we address it or do we not? And it can be something as simple as, my pencil keeps rolling off of my desk. Do I deal with that or do I not? And that's your first kind of branch. And then you get into risk. What's the risk if the pencil keeps falling off? Do I care about making changes to it or getting a new desk, etc., etc.? But at the beginning part, and I've seen this a lot with clients, particularly when we're working with them on an ongoing basis, helping them through these kinds of decisions, is there are many people, many business owners that think that if they do nothing, that's fine, and they're paralyzed by, what if I make the wrong decision? Well, I don't know if this is going to be the correct decision, or there maybe I got to wait to collect in more data, or I've got to run it through the whole team and get everybody on board, or I've got to, we got to put it to the committee, we've got to wait to see what this other factor is going to do, and they end up in this constant state of waiting for things to be perfect, and thereby de facto they have decided to do nothing for whatever reason, and then
Right.
that's going to play out. And I've seen people that have gotten themselves into trouble because they just didn't do something. And it really goes to that first fear of, am I going to make the wrong decision? Yes, you are. Spoilers, you're probably I think both of us can attest. God knows every week I make a bunch of decisions that I look back and say, ah, that wasn't
Shouldn't have
that
done
wasn't
that.
good. Ooh, seemed like a good idea at the time, but that didn't play out. But instead of going, oh my God, I've made a terrible decision, you just use that as a data collection. Well, we did this played out well, that didn't work. Now we got to adjust, make a new round of decisions. And it really boils down again to that core fundamental concept of don't worry so much about making the right decision, because that analysis paralysis, I've seen that get people time and time and time again, of wanting things to be perfect. It's, is it the perfect time to start the business? Is it the perfect time to do this? Is everything, I've got to get everything lined up. I mean, if we're speaking really frankly, which I believe is the whole point of this, a lot of people will use that more as a cover for a fear of making the decision, because it
Yep.
becomes much easier to say, well, I've got to wait for everything to be perfect before I do this, when really at its core, it's being used as just a justification for not moving forward due to fear.
Yep.
Depending on what you're dealing with, that may be correct. Other times it may just be an excuse. But there's a lack of, I just lost my point. Make I've got it back, of making the just making a decision, seeing what happens, and then you just make another decision based off the pretty much piggyback of the first one. Nothing through life is ever you make one decision and then that's it.
Right.
It what looks like one decision is actually a bunch of small ones that have just been kind of fit in together, where somebody says, I made the decision to go into business.
Mm-hmm.
Well, really, when you look at it, it's a bunch of, I decided to buy some stuff, then I decided to go see if I could find someone to sell it to, and then I decided I got to put it somewhere, I put it in my garage, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then you take that, zoom out a whole bunch, and now it looks, one decision is actually made up of 500.
Yeah. And what really resonated with me is, I think it can be a place to hide from some things that might be a little out of your comfort zone, or I don't know, from there. But the your example of the pencil, I thought was pretty key into that. Like, in some of the ways that I can go into evaluate a decision, I guess, like, one, like you mentioned, it keeps rolling off the desk. So you've got sort of an inconvenience that's there that you can fix, but is it worth it? So you sort of analyze it by a threshold of pain. Like, is this thing causing me enough of an inconvenience that I'm actually going to do something about it, or can I just keep dealing with it? Or on the other hand, how would it improve my life if I stopped it from rolling off the desk?
And a lot of it gets into, the consequences of things going poorly, which I think is what you had kind of intuitively started talking about already. Is so we've moved in that initial point of effectively a go no go. At every point in making a decision, we're always looking at risk, right? Everything is, well, what
Mm-hmm.
is the risk of something here going wrong? What could be the consequences of, if we make the wrong decision, or if we don't do anything, what could happen from there? And I think everybody would agree that generally, the higher the risk of things going poorly and the more serious the consequences, generally the more rigorous your level of analysis is going to be. If we're talking about spending hundreds of millions of dollars, unless you're a billionaire with hundreds of billions of dollars where it becomes a drop in the bucket, which then to them means it's not really a risk, nobody's going to just go willy-nilly do that. Unless you're SoftBank, judging by some of the articles that I've seen of what they've invested in. I wish we could just willy-nilly make decisions like
Yeah.
they do. Hashtag WeWork. Oh my God, I can't believe that didn't work out. Um, episode 4, throwing shade at WeWork and SoftBank. But there's an element of everybody intuitively understands risk once you become a certain age. Everybody knows babies don't understand risk at all. Yeah, I know you know this from personal experience right now that it's amazing the ways that they will creatively try to kill themselves because they just don't
Oh, it's
understand
great.
the risks of anything.
I'm like, how did you even think of that? Honestly.
I didn't know somebody could die that way, but here we are. No, don't do that. Get that out of your nose and your ear and your mouth, and please get away from. I didn't even know we had an electrical outlet over there. That's been hidden for decades. How did you find that? But
Exactly.
there's an element of it's I mean it's your classic risk assessment of what are we trying to do, and I promise that as this goes on we'll get a little more specific because I know what we've been saying is very high level, but even at the beginning there's a lot of considerations of what are you dealing with if things go poorly, what's going to happen, and that is
Yep.
generally going to drive how much planning you have to put into what you're about to do. When I'm making multitudes of decisions for the business every week. We always have things that are either operating efficiently, stuff's going wrong, previous decisions that I made didn't pan out the way I thought they were going to. The thing that's always in the back of my mind is okay, what what could be the worst case scenario for this? And then I work my way backwards. Is the worst case scenario something to the level that even if there's not a high probability of it happening, I'm terrified that this could come to pass because it would be devastating, which is the entire concept behind purchasing insurance? Or am I less worried about this could go poorly, but we'll learn from it and we'll be able to make adjustments going into the future?
Yeah.
And that to me kind of gets into the your first if you anything you want to do, you really need to break down if this goes poorly, is it going to completely ruin me? If somebody gives you two decisions to make and if one of them if it goes poorly, you will just die and the other one you won't die, well, you're going to be really looking at those differently and saying, is if I'm going to do this and there's a risk of death, I'm going to put a whole lot more care and attention into what I'm doing than whatever the consequences here aren't as severe. I don't need to worry about it. There's a direct correlation pretty much between overall level of risk and loss and how much planning you should be doing for what you're doing. Now, again, always comes with a caveat, don't fall into analysis paralysis and get stuck in the planning phase and think you've got to do everything because again you've now circled back to the beginning part of not making a decision, and that's always the concern whenever we get in really risky situations is I got to plan and plan and plan and plan and plan. I believe I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm pretty certain there is a death screen in Call of Duty that says plans are useless, but planning is invaluable. And that's one I've kept in mind if I sat there and plan out, all right, what are we going to do for this? How's this going to work? And then the moment it happens, you sit there and you go, wow, I know this will be a great segue for you, particularly in your marketing when you were first getting started, that you had a whole plan for how it was going to work and you had
Hmm.
everything really clear in your head and you were sitting there going, yeah, this is what's going to happen. And then you started doing it and it didn't work. So why don't you walk us through that? How did you go through and make those decisions and see that all of them were wrong?
Well, I think sort of like you were mentioning earlier, I think it's really easy to build it up in your head and think that the worst outcome is going to happen if you make this decision. Like, and I think for a lot of us as business owners, that's the fact that your business would fail or something like that. And I forget who exactly I heard this from. It was on another podcast, and I think they were talking about real estate, but he put it in terms of, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you're investing in properties, and if you go bankrupt, the worst that's going to happen is they make you give the house back. And I'm not advocating for anyone to go out there and go do something crazy in real estate or whatever, but I've always kind of kept that in my head of, it's really not that bad. Like, there are some decisions you could make for sure that would blow up your business, but you know, that's when you have to get in and weigh Like, what's the probability of that happening? And like you said, is that enough to scare me out of it, essentially? So, going back to your question, I think, like, for me in the first few months of starting the business and making changes, I think going into like making quick decisions can come from like overconfidence and just thinking that, I don't know. I have the mindset a lot of times that other people have done this. I know I can do it. So going
I mean
into it,
that was what we first got started with was, well, we've
yeah,
seen the people that have businesses and we're better than them, so it can't be that
it
hard.
can't be that hard. But then, when you've gone a few months or however long, depending on the decision, like that you need to evaluate it, the key for me was having other people to discuss it with, and that would give me that outside feedback, and also people that aren't afraid to like sugarcoat or not sugarcoat something to you. So I think having that outside source, whatever it may be, and high level, I guess that's why companies have board of advisors and things like that, where you have people who have been there, done that, and can show you the ropes or clue you in when you might need to pivot that thing. But there are decisions where you can realize it yourself at a pretty quick extent, I think. Like if you are, I guess with clients that I work with, like creators who are constantly putting out essentially new pieces of art. Like if you're creating YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever you do out there, it's creative, it's art. So everyone is different and you have a formula, but maybe you're trying to change one thing and it blows up. Like one video doesn't perform as well as this one. So you go back to what's tried and true. That's a really easy decision to make, just using numbers and data, right? So I think from that, there's you could apply that to any decision, I guess, but kind of going down a rabbit hole on that one.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. What were the specific decisions that you had made in the beginning? Because I know we've talked about this, that did not pan out in the way you were hoping. Let's give the dear listeners some concrete examples of poor decisions that we've made and how it didn't work and how we have needed to adjust. I've got some examples that I promise we're going to share in the failure here. I just wanted to put you on the spot
No,
first.
I'm all good, man. The first one that comes to mind, and I think I started getting into this a bit a few episodes ago. We'll start on the marketing side. So like business development, all of that. That was a really quick lesson because when I started, nothing was coming in at first. And that's sort of the just a new business thing for some where, you've got to go out and build the clients. But the things I was doing were not directly getting me to that point. So what was it? So I was doing mostly content marketing, which is really a slow burn. Like you've got to build that up and do it a long time. So
So what do you mean content marketing? I'll admit I'm not super familiar with that.
yeah, so putting posts out on like social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, starting a YouTube channel, things like that take a while to build the audience that then funnels down to clients.
So what we're doing right now.
Exactly. So you can be one of the lucky few who like you have posts go viral or something and then a bunch of people are like, "Oh, I want that." So there are both ends of it, but I was on the wrong end at first. So it almost was sort of like a if you build it, they will come mentality, when in reality, this business, you have to go out and be boots on the ground, basically. So that's where I changed things really quickly and started going from those what I call low touch activities for lead gen that are really easy to do but don't directly put you in front of somebody, to high touch, which is one-on-ones and face-to-face conversations where you're interacting with other professionals in the industry or things like that. So, not going down a marketing rabbit hole here, that was the decision that helped me to kind of pivot from uh, no business to bringing in new clients and actually making money, as is
So
objective number one of our business here.
yeah,
So,
going back to the fundamentals. So if I could boil down what you just said into kind of its base components. At the very beginning, you had this idea that I'm going to put out content onto the internet. People are going to see it. They will recognize how amazing you are. And then the clients will flock to me and life will be amazing. And I know you had done previous research on how to do content marketing and all of that stuff that encompasses it. And so you made the decision, I'm going to go ahead and do that. The consequence, if I don't do this, is I am still right here where I am with no clients in
yep,
the beginning. So what do I have to lose? So really, the risk was minimal.
yep,
So you went out and did all that, and you learned a couple very important things, namely being this is not working right now because I don't have a pre-existing network and I need clients to come in quicker, and this content is not being seen by anyone. And so you learned from that, okay, now that I have made this decision to do this kind of marketing, it did not work out and I am seeing the consequences of that. I now need to adjust and choose different types of how I go and approach clients. And I
yep,
think that really, in a nutshell, is the core decision making process that I have learned over my life. Is that it really, we could pretty much stop the episode probably after I say this, but to the to the to cut to the point, it's never just one decision that gets made. It's a sequence of decisions that are supposed to build on the previous. If you're going to do something, there is a certain element where, particularly if you have never done something before, experience pretty much is just a result of having made a bunch of decisions in the past and seeing how they've played out, so
mm-hmm,
you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. When you're doing something for the first time, your most important thought to really approach it with is, I'm going to do this, we're going to see what happens, and then I'm going to adjust. It is very rare that you truly have a one and done, this is a final decision that is being made. We will not have an ability to make any adjustment from this point forward. Those do happen. Terminations, stuff like that, serious things, life or death. Those happen. Those require due care. I'm going to be honest, you should be able to identify those situations because those consequences will be, you're going to know. You are really going to know if you're in a situation like that. Odds are, if you're not, you've got some wiggle room to play with. I was at the AICPA's Leadership Academy. I think it was 2.5 years ago now. And one of the things that a lot of the people there had talked about struggling with was that fear of just kind of making the decision. What if I make the wrong decision? And that was where I got to see some outside perspective of it truly at its core. It's about just choosing something. I played rugby when I was in grad school, and the advice that the coach gave to us was, look, when you're out there on the pitch, you do not have a lot of time to make a decision. I don't care if you go off the rehearsed plan, if you make a decision and follow through violently. We're playing rugby. You couldn't, half-ass what you were doing,
you can't
otherwise
be
you were going to get laid
nonviolent.
out. But that was the thing. It was if you're once you get the ball in your hands, make a decision and violently commit to it, and then we'll go from there. And it really ends up being the same in business and in life. If you're choosing to
Absolutely.
do something, make sure you at least think through what's going on, but after a certain point, you're just going to have to make that decision and see what happens
Mm-hmm.
and go from there. To follow up on your marketing example, and this is a recent example for us because this has taken place over the last month and a half, 2 months for us. So I have been working on rolling out Google ads for the business to sell our bookkeeping work because of all the services that we offer. Tax preparation and bookkeeping are probably our two compliance services that we also have our processes figured out and locked down the best. Those projects don't need my attention as much. We have a really good team to take care of things. And so I said, okay, I'm going to focus our efforts on putting out ads for bookkeeping services because when we pick up bookkeeping clients, generally we pretty much also get the tax work. And so on a pure dollar per return analysis, that is kind of how to maximize our spend from how we see with our own clients. I've done, again, I've done some planning into this for starters. What do we want to target? I want to target the stuff that's going to give us the biggest return. I have an understanding of our business, of our conversion between accounting and tax clients and vice versa, and
Mm-hmm.
knowing that if we pick up one, odds are it's going to turn into the other, and so we get the most return on our money. So this was the planning portion of that to identify where do we want to put some marketing dollars. And so I said, okay, we're going to go ahead, run Google ads here. And I think we were spending about $2,500 a month. We go through it, run it for a month and a half, something like that. And I'm about $2,000 in the hole. We've got a bunch of people have clicked on the ads, made it to the page, and nobody booked a meeting. Talking 60, 70, 80 clicks on it, people landing onto the website, looking at it, nobody's booking a meeting. And so, I have known of clients that would see something like that and say, obviously the Google ads aren't working. Now, I don't see it that way. And what it was we've got people clicking on the ad itself was working, but now once they're getting to the web page, that part wasn't working. And so my initial decision of we're going to run ads and it's going to get us clients turned more into we're going to run ads. Damn it, now I've got this other weakness in our messaging that now I have to fix this if I
Mm-hmm.
want the whole system to work together cohesively. And it turned into a very incremental, I had to get additional input into how things were set up, make sure that we understood that the ads that we were running themselves were still good and were set up in a way that I wasn't just burning through money, to make sure that the pages that the prospects were landing on made sense based on how it needed to be set up for marketing purposes and not just me as the dumb accountant who doesn't really know how to do. I could do sales, but marketing is not really my forte,
Yeah.
and that's why we got additional help. And it turned into multiple levels of improving that whole process just from that decision of, well, we're going to run ads and see what happens. And then once I got that data, I then had more decisions to make based on what we saw with the data, rinse and repeat. And now every month we're continuing to kind of work on that. And that really is the core of decision making in general, is you're just trying to make the best decision based on the information available at the time. Odds are it's not going to be a one and done. You're going to make it. You're going to want to look at what happened, see what went well, what went poorly, do your lessons learned. Every time you make a decision, really, you have an opportunity for lessons learned.
Yeah.
Going back to the pencil example, if you keep setting your pencil down halfway off the edge of the table and it keeps falling, maybe you should do a lessons learned analysis of, well, maybe I shouldn't put the pencil down with half of it off the edge of the table and it wouldn't fall off. If you're not doing that and you keep doing the same thing every time, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. So
Yeah.
if you're doing that, you're not making decisions, you're insane, and you need to see a doctor. But in life in general, when you're going through this with the business, it's constant incremental decisions, and it's just re-looking back. What did I do? What worked well? What didn't work well? The important part, particularly if I've found that the decisions that were the most fucked up were the decisions that taught me the most. When you make a decision, say you do something for the first time, and it works 100%, you don't actually have enough context to know, well, did we do things correctly or did we get insanely lucky? And this oftentimes gets into the core of people that can't recreate their initial success because they don't actually understand why it went well. But this is why when you look up a lot of statistics and people say that, the second, third, fourth, fifth business owners fail over and over, and it's the fifth one that's most successful, that's because it's usually by that point they've gone through life enough to understand, to learn from their previous decisions what not to do. We've seen time and time again when you get into succession planning, you got somebody new that takes over, making decisions, doesn't understand why the previous ones were made in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
They start doing a whole bunch of things, everything gets fucked up, and then the business goes under, and you go, wow, it ran for 40 years, but then it hit the grandkids, and it just didn't work because the grandkids don't understand what it is they're supposed to be doing, because
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the lessons learned because they're parents or whoever didn't explain to them all the things they learned from making the decisions. Every business that's lasted for a while is ultimately, at its core, just a long series of decisions that usually went poorly and people adjusted there. Now they've finally figured things out.
Yeah.
That's why you look at the articles, the 50-year-old entrepreneurs are usually better than the 30-year-olds. And for the most part, I don't trust the 20-year-olds because I was a 20-year-old and oh my God, I can't believe how little we knew. Still can't believe we managed to get things going. Who in their right mind was paying me?
And look at you now.
Oh, look at me now. Now that we've crested into our 30s,
I
now
know.
that we
And,
have an
you
idea.
mentioned something too I thought was interesting, and I promise this is not a marketing podcast, but going back to your Google Ads example, it was really, it caught my attention, related to, like, I know we've talked about decisions where you can quickly evaluate and change what you're doing. Google Ads, I don't think are one that are in that. So that bucket of decisions where you almost have to be willing to wait X amount of time. And like going back to this example, I've read for Google Ads that a lot of times you have to wait like 6 months or even a year before you see results. So what do you think or how can you evaluate decisions like that where you have to wait a certain amount of time to see even positive results, and then like you cross that threshold and maybe it's still bad?
It's That's an interesting one because you're effectively making the decision to collect a bunch of data and go
Yeah.
from there. For us, part of why I moved a little sooner on it, which may have been the right call, may have been not, we have to wait and see, is I had a few pieces of concrete data that I was acting off of. I had the number of clicks that made it to the web page, to the actual website, and then I had how many people submitted on either the contact form or scheduled a meeting. And so I pretty much did just a gut analysis. If I've got, say, 60 people that have clicked on this ad and have made it to the website, and nobody has submitted anything, what are the odds that I've got 60, I'm going to say, individuals that have hit and not a single one has opted to go for it? Even a one, we're talking, if your conversion rate is even 5%, there should have been at least one, right? And so it's one of those, maybe I'm too hasty in this decision. Maybe at some point somebody who specializes in Google Ads beyond anyone we've dealt with is going to be sitting here listening to this going, "Oh my god, they are idiots. They shouldn't have been doing that. They should have just let it run." In which case, totally fine. I'll own up to that one. It was my decision. I'm going to own up to it because, ultimately I'm accountable for it, which I believe is actually the topic of our next episode. Figured I'd sneak that in there. But I'm not going to sit and wait when, in my opinion at least, I have enough data to draw a conclusion using some statistics of there should have been at least one. At least if I had gotten 1 out of 60, 1 out of 70, 1 out of 80, I would have said, okay, it just needs to go and we'll
Mm-hmm.
collect more data. But if we're talking, because I know my usual conversion when I have contact with clients, And there should have been, if it's working well, if the content that they're landing on speaks to them, should have had at least one. So the fact that there's none tells me that probably if they're making it to the page and they're not submitting, they aren't really being grabbed by what they're seeing. So I need to then, the ad itself is getting traffic. Now, if it was only 10 clicks, I'd say, okay, then the ad just needs to run for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking, 60, 70, 80, whatever it is. Now, there's still the risk that it was still at that time set up incorrectly. I can't rule that one out. But I'm talking about people landing. We were able to track, and I was able to see people scrolling through the page because we actually had recordings of people landing on there so that I could see their end user behavior, and they were going through looking at the content. Nobody wanted to go there. They were actually going through the entire page, clicking on the About Us and all that. And I'm sitting there watching somebody go through the website and then leave. And that tells me, well, shit, I need to readjust what they're seeing because people are actually, they're looking at it, it just isn't getting them. So
Right.
that's why, I'm completely pontificating right now, but I believe a lot of the ads have to run for a while is in the context of getting people to click in the exposure to it. I focused less on, I'm not trying to have 100% ownership in that particular ad category, but of the people that clicked, what percentage of those were conversions? The answer was 0. That gave me enough data and a large enough of a sample size to tell me I had to make an adjustment, from there.
Yeah.
And so we did. And now I am in the midst of seeing how that is going. We have changed how we're tracking things. We have changed bid strategies. And so we're going to let that go and kind of see, how that plays out.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Like, in taking that to another example, potentially, like what I hear you saying is that even though you have to let this decision play out over time, you're not sitting from month 0 to month 6 and then in month 6 collecting all the data and
Correct.
reanalyzing. Like,
It's
over
a
this
it's a
time you
even
are
even though we've got to pull in data over the period, I'm still constantly looking at what we're doing and seeing because you never
right.
know. They may say you need 6 months of data, but that's just a guesstimate that is completely independent of any industry or anything
Yeah.
else going on. We may have enough after a month and a half to say we need to make some adjustments because we have enough data to support making that decision.
Yeah,
And
it's like if you have an
really,
employee or something where you're
correct.
constantly evaluating them over their first few months or something to see, is this the right hire?
If somebody could be on a 3 month probationary period, but if they tell the client to go fuck themselves in their third week and get hostile, you don't need to collect 2 more months of data to see that this probably isn't going to be a good fit. They gotta go. If you
Yep.
well, they threatened the client with a gun, but the client was being a little rude, so we're gonna let them go through their probationary period and then make a decision. No, that's dumb. That is my God, that is dumb. And I'm gonna segue into I wanted to get this little I'm gonna call it a nugget of wisdom, which probably sounds a little self-righteous here in this, but I've seen this played out time and time again. Is particularly when you're looking in this kind of review of the Google Analytics data or the employer, whatever it is. Usually if you're making a decision, you have a problem that you are trying to solve. If there's no problem, you're not really going to make changes. But there is some
Hmm.
thing that you are trying to address. And I kind of call that the why. Why are we trying to do this? And I think anyone that's worked for a large organization will have an all too familiar understanding of decisions being made that don't address the underlying why. Before you're even making the decision, to have a good, clean decision making process, you should understand why am I trying to do this? What is the point? Which is a really stupid thing to say out loud at times. But everybody's got that story or has read about the story of somebody at the meeting who said, why are we doing this? And everybody around the room goes, shit, I don't actually know why everybody just seemed like we were supposed to be doing. My God, they're right. Why are we doing this in the first place?
Yep.
Because at its core, everything you're deciding around is supposed to be driven by the problem or the issue you are trying to solve. There is a reason, a thing that you are dealing with. In medicine, treatment is driven by the root cause of the illness that is ailing you. If your leg has been cut off, they're not going to put you in chemo. They're going to give you a tourniquet to try and stop the bleeding. Whatever you're trying to decide should be driven by, what am I doing? What am I trying to do? Why are we doing this? And I have seen organizations make multiple decisions that are disjointed and confusing because the chief decision makers don't know what the fuck problem they're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
They see these sales are down. We need to do this. We got to, or money's tight. I got to cut market. Why are sales down? Why is money tight? Why can we not keep money in the bank? Why are our guys constantly over our time budgets? Why do we keep getting the wrong kinds of work coming in? Once you identify the why, well, then we know what the problem is we're trying to solve. Chief, good example of this is sometimes my own team will at times ask me questions where they will do what I affectionately refer to as a data dump. Hey, I was looking at this report and things seem a little weird about this, and yeah. You go, okay, what's your question? This seems weird is not a question, that is a statement of
Mm-hmm.
opinion. What is the question? If we know the question, we can answer the question. We can make a decision to address the question. I guess my rambling rant here about this, the whole point is that with whatever you're trying to do, make sure you understand, why am I doing this in the first place? Some of them will be easy to answer. Somebody says, I want to start a business. Why? Well, I want to take control over my own financial future. I don't want to have a boss. Okay, good. But if you can't even answer it to that level, I'm trying to start a business. Why? I I don't know. Everybody's just saying I should start one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't have a clear vision or anything for what you're doing. You need to go back to step one of, why are you doing this in the first place?
And there's that
Why are
pesky
we here?
word should, which we do not like for that to pop up in the decision making
Oh,
process.
should is such a dangerous word. This is what we
Mm-hmm.
should be doing. You know what word counters should? Why? We should be doing
Exactly.
this. Why should we be doing this? Give me we're a couple of accountants. We like things to be cold and rational, much like our hearts. Give me a logical series of assumptions for what we need to do and why we need to do it. You need to be able to convince me why.
Yep.
We're making a decision. Why do we need to be making this decision? What is the point? Funny enough, I think we really saved the core part of this at the end of the episode. So woe on anybody who stopped halfway through and said these guys are just
Just missing.
rambling all over.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, that's half of why you're here, is because even we don't know at times where this is going to go. But I think to boil down when it comes to decision making, from making a decision, the core problem every person on the planet makes is they don't know why they are doing what they're doing,
Yeah.
why they're trying to
Yep.
make this decision. And then we sit there and go, I've tried everything and I don't know what's going on. Nothing I do seems to work. Well, what are you trying to solve? I Sales are down. Why are sales down? Well, we're not getting the jobs. Why aren't we getting the jobs? Well, my sales guys are only working 20 hours a week. How many hours are they supposed to be working a week? Well, 40. Why are they only working 20? Well, I haven't been checking on them, and so they've been kind of slacking off because they get paid the same regardless. Well, why haven't you been checking in on them? I've been busy with other things. Well, what's more important than keeping track of your sales, and why are you so slammed with everything else if we don't have work to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then you repeat that process. My grandfather, who worked in machining, was very fond of saying you have to ask why about 6 times to get to the nature of the problem. And generally, the more pissed off somebody gets every time you ask the question why, tells you the closer you are to getting to the root cause of the problem. Why aren't my sales guys performing? Well, it's because you, as the CEO, aren't actually holding them accountable because
Mm-hmm.
you're off doing whatever playing golf. It's your fault. Now, you need to make the decision for what you're going to do to address that, and then we can go from there. But ultimately, if you're making a decision, the important part is to understand you're never operating with perfect information. It's an incremental process. It truly pretty much always is a constant state of learning and adjusting. And you need to make sure you understand what am I doing in the first place, and why am I trying to do it, and then letting that guide through the rest of it. Just think back to any large organization that constantly implements new systems, new processes, hires new people, and everyone sits there going, "Why are we doing this?"
Mm-hmm.
And everyone goes, "I don't know." The CTO said, "Well, we got to roll this out because the CFO says we're losing money," and they haven't said anything why, but that now we have to do this, and nobody knows why. And that pesky word starts to creep into everyone's lexicon again, kind of giving us a hint as to where the issue is. And once you kind of figure those out, you will. It's still scary to make decisions, but you'll find that it gives you a whole lot more wiggle room. It's not so much of a life and death. And now you understand logically what it is you're supposed to be doing and how to really make that decision. If you can't answer why, you probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Yep. Amen.
And that is my finale.
And I think
So
that's where we leave it, man. I don't know how we can say it any better than that.
oh, I thank you. And I think this is where I get to do the segue because we have already agreed on the next topic, which is accountability. Because now that you've made a decision, how do you follow through? And ultimately, it all irritatingly boils down to accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So join us next time for episode 5, all about accountability.